Welcome to Brainwaves and Breakthroughs.
Okay, so let's be honest. We've all been in those lines. You know, the ones that seem to stretch on forever, just eating away at our time. But have you ever, stopped to think about all the stuff going on behind the scenes of those lines? There's actual science involved. So today, we are diving deep into the world of queuing. We'll be exploring the psychology, the math, and even some of the cultural quirks that make waiting in line such a universal experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, when you think about it. Something as simple as just standing in line has actually been studied and analyzed in so much detail. We've got research articles here all about the psychology of waiting, insights from some queue management experts, and even some historical accounts of queues going way back to ancient civilizations.
You know, it's funny. When we think about lines, we think of them as a modern inconvenience. But can you imagine ancient Egyptians lining up for their daily bread and beer rations? I mean, queues have been around for centuries. But today, we're going to try to uncover why we wait, how to make it more bearable, and maybe even discover some unexpected benefits of this unavoidable part of life. So, first things first, why do queues even exist? I mean, seems pretty obvious, right? Too many people, not enough stuff.
Yeah, you're right. At the core, it's about supply and demand. But it's not just about logistics. Think about a queue as a microcosm of society. It's like this tiny stage where you can see human behavior play out in the really fascinating ways.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more about the social side of queues.
Okay, well, imagine this. You're walking down the street, you see two restaurants. One is empty, and the other has a line sneaking out the door. Which one are you more likely to choose?
Probably the one with the line. I mean, I figure it must be better if everyone's waiting.
Exactly. That's the power of social proof. We're kind of hardwired to follow the crowd. Even a long line for something simple, like a trendy pastry, can actually signal that it's high quality or really popular. It doesn't always make sense, but it's a really powerful psychological force.
So even though we complain about waiting, we're secretly influenced by it too.
Absolutely. And this social dynamic creates this whole set of unwritten rules and psychological effects. For instance, have you ever noticed how time seems to just drag on when you're standing in a line, like a really boring line?
Oh, yeah. Tell about it. It's like every second ticks by in slow motion.
Well, research shows that unoccupied time feels longer. When we don't have anything to occupy our minds and we're just focused on the wait itself, time seems to crawl. That's why you see those magazines at the checkout or those really captivating displays. In museum queues, it's all about distraction.
So basically, keep our minds busy and the time flies, right?
Exactly. And it goes beyond just simple distractions. A lot of businesses are tapping into this, like the power of experience design to transform those dreaded waits into engaging pre-shows.
Well, you can't talk about queuing without mentioning the Masters of the Queue experience, Disney.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Disney has really turned queuing into an art form. They weave narratives, they create captivating environments, and engage all your senses, so the wait itself becomes part of the adventure. Think about the Indiana Jones ride queue. You're not just standing in line. You're exploring a lost temple with hidden passageways and ancient artifacts.
It's like the wait is almost as fun as the ride itself. They're geniuses.
Yeah.
But what about when there are no distractions, just a plain, boring line? That's when the anxiety kicks in, right?
You're absolutely right. Uncertainty fuels anxiety. Not knowing how long we'll be stuck waiting is psychologically draining. That's where those estimated wait times and progress bars come in. They give us a sense of control and predictability, which eases our mental burden.
It's like when you're waiting for a download, that little progress bar. Even if it's moving slowly, it gives you some hope.
Exactly. And it's not just about giving information. Even a simple acknowledgement from staff, like, "We'll be with you shortly," can go a long way in reducing anxiety.
But even knowing how long the wait will be doesn't always make it feel better, right?
That's true. Fairness actually plays a huge role in how we experience queues. Imagine someone cuts in front of you at the coffee shop. How would that make you feel?
Oh, I'd be furious. Talk about a queue rage trigger.
It's like a primal response. Cutting or unfair prioritization really sparks outrage because it violates our sense of social justice. It's not just about our place in line. It's about this principle of fairness and order.
So basically, keep it fair and everyone's happy.
In theory, yes. But even in a perfectly fair and orderly queue, there's a whole other level of complexity. The math behind the lines.
Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. Tell me about this science of lines stuff.
It's called queuing theory. It's a branch of mathematics, all dedicated to optimizing queues. It looks at things like arrival rates, service times, and even the configuration of the line itself to figure out how to make those queues flow more efficiently.
It's more than just amusement parks and grocery stores.
Oh yeah, much more. Queuing theory is used to manage traffic flow, optimize healthcare systems, and even design computer networks. It's everywhere.
Wow. I had no idea math was so important to something as simple as waiting in line.
It really is. And by understanding these mathematical principles, we could design systems that minimize wait times and maximize efficiency.
Okay. So we've got the psychology of waiting and the math behind the lines. But is there ever a time when waiting is actually, well, enjoyable?
You might be surprised to hear this, but yes, there actually are benefits to queuing. Think about events, like concerts or sports games. The anticipation, the shared excitement with the people around you, that collective energy, it's all part of the experience.
That's true. You can really feel the buzz in the air. And that shared anticipation makes the event even more enjoyable.
Exactly. And in a world that's constantly rushing, queuing can actually offer a rare opportunity to slow down, disconnect, and just observe. It's a chance to people watch. Let your mind wander, or even strike up a conversation with a complete stranger.
You know, I never thought about it that way. But it's true. Sometimes those moments of forced stillness can be surprisingly refreshing. It's like a mini meditation break.
Exactly. And sometimes the wait itself can actually enhance the enjoyment of the final experience.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about a roller coaster.
Yeah.
A slow climb to the top, the anticipation building with every click of the chain. It's all part of the thrill.
It's like the build-up to Christmas morning. The anticipation is almost as exciting as opening the presents.
Exactly. The wait becomes an integral part of the experience. It makes the payoff even sweeter.
Okay, so even though waiting can be frustrating, there are some hidden upsides. But let's be real. Most of us do want to minimize our time in line. Are there any tricks for managing our perception of time?
There are definitely some strategies for making those waits feel less arduous. And it all starts with understanding that our perception of time is, well, a bit wonky. Did you know? Studies show that people tend to overestimate their waiting time by an average of 36%.
Seriously, we're that bad at judging time?
It seems so. That's why those estimated wait time signs are so effective. They manage our expectations and often make the actual wait feel shorter.
So businesses can use this to their advantage?
Absolutely. By adding a little padding to those estimated wait times, they can create a pleasant surprise for their customers. When the actual wait is shorter, it's all about exceeding expectations.
That's pretty clever. Any other time-bending tips?
Well, like we discussed before, distraction is key. Having something to keep our minds occupied, whether it's a good book, a catchy song, or even mentally planning your grocery list, can make a huge difference in how long a wait feels.
It's like that saying, a watched pot never boils. When we're hyper-focused on the wait, it feels like it's dragging on forever.
Exactly. So next time you're stuck in line, try to shift your focus, engage your mind, and you might find that the time flies by.
This is all so fascinating. We've talked about the psychology of waiting, the math behind the lines, and even those moments of joy we can sometimes find in the middle of a wait. But we haven't even touched on the cultural differences in queuing behavior.
Ah, yes. That's a whole other layer of complexity.
I've heard that the British have a particular fondness for queues. Is that just a stereotype, or is there something more to it?
It's definitely more than just a stereotype.
Okay. I can't wait to hear all about this. Tell me everything.
So in British culture, it's like orderly queues are like a deeply ingrained social norm. It's all about politeness, respect for others. And it's actually a really fascinating display of their cultural values. Cutting in line is a huge no-no. It's like breaking this unspoken social contract.
It's almost like a cultural ritual then, a way of showing their commitment to order and fairness.
Exactly. It's about maintaining that social harmony, reinforcing those shared values.
So how does that really structured British etiquette compare to other cultures? Is this something you see everywhere?
Well, it's fascinating how queuing norms can vary so drastically across different cultures. In some places, you won't see a formal single-file line. It's much more fluid, like a gathering of people, and there's a general understanding of who arrived first, rather than a strict, linear queue.
So it's less about a physical line and more about a shared understanding of the order of arrival.
Exactly. It's about reading those subtle social cues and respecting the unwritten rules of that specific context.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted. What might seem totally normal to us could be completely baffling to someone from a different culture.
Absolutely. And personal space preferences also play a role. Like, think about how uncomfortable it feels when someone's standing too close to you in a line.
Yeah.
We all have this sense of personal space, and those boundaries can be really different depending on the culture.
It's like those invisible bubbles we carry around, expanding and contracting wherever we go in the world.
That's a perfect analogy. And those bubbles can lead to all sorts of interesting social dynamics in those cues.
Okay, so we've gone through the psychology, the cultural nuances, but before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to go back to something we talked about before. What can businesses do to make a more enjoyable queuing environment? We talked about distractions, estimated wait times, and how Disney's really good at creating those experiences. What else is there?
Well, sometimes it's not just about the physical layout or the distractions. It's about managing expectations. Remember how we were talking about people overestimating their wait times?
Yeah.
Businesses can use that to their advantage.
You mean like those signs that say, average wait time is 15 minutes, even though you feel like you've been standing there forever?
Exactly. Those signs are a perfect example of managing perceptions of time. It's all about setting realistic expectations and then exceeding them.
So if you tell me it's going to be a 20-minute wait, but it ends up being only 15, I'm going to be happy.
Precisely. That little surprise, that feeling of getting more time back than you thought, can make customers a lot more satisfied.
So it's not just about making the line move faster. It's also about the psychological experience. I like it. Any other psychological tricks?
There's this really interesting concept called the pre-process wait. It's this idea that waiting feels longer when you're just waiting for the process to even begin, once you're actually being served or doing something. The wait tends to feel shorter.
So like the difference between waiting to order coffee and then waiting for them to make it.
Exactly. Once you've placed your order, you feel like you're making progress, even if you're still technically waiting.
That makes sense. So how can businesses use this?
They can structure their processes to minimize that initial wait. Like, instead of making customers wait in line to fill out paperwork, they could have them do it online ahead of time. Or they could have a waiting area with comfy seats and some amenities. So it feels more like a lounge than just standing in a line.
So you're changing when the waiting actually starts. Clever. Anything else?
Another good tactic is to create a sense of control.
Control. How do you give someone control when they're just stuck in a line?
By offering choices, even small ones, like letting them choose which line to join, even if all the lines move at the same speed. It can give them a sense of agency and reduce feelings of helplessness.
Like you're choosing your destiny, even if it's just between line A and line B.
Exactly. It's a subtle psychological shift, but it can make a difference in how people perceive the wait.
Wow. We've covered so much. From psychology to math to culture and design, it's mind-blowing.
It really is amazing how something so ordinary can tell us so much about human nature.
Okay, I have one last question before we move on. We've talked about how cues can bring people together, but what about when those connections go bad? What about the dark side of queuing? Cue rage.
Ah, yes, cue rage. It's a real thing, and it shows how much we care about fairness and order in these little social situations.
So what sets it off? What makes people snap in line?
Well, like we discussed earlier, unfairness is a big one. Seeing someone cut the line, or getting preferential treatment. When you've been waiting patiently, it violates our sense of justice, and it can lead to anger and resentment.
It's like that feeling of protecting your territory, your spot in line.
Exactly. When those norms are violated, it feels like a personal attack. But it's not always about fairness, right? Sometimes it's just the wait itself. Even if everything's fair, people still get frustrated.
Oh, definitely. Long wait times, especially if they're unexpected or unexplained, can really push people's buttons.
That goes back to managing expectations and giving feedback. When businesses don't do that, people lose their patience.
And sometimes it just feels like the universe is against you. You're stuck in every line imaginable.
It's true. Sometimes it feels like we're destined to spend our life waiting in line.
Okay, so we know what causes queue rage, but what happens when people lose it?
Well, it can range from mild annoyance, like muttering under your breath, or giving someone a dirty look, to full-on shouting matches, and even physical fights in extreme cases.
Yikes. I've definitely seen some heated arguments, but luckily nothing too violent.
It's rare, but it does happen. It reminds us that, even in these ordinary situations, Emotions can get out of control.
So what can we do about it? How can we prevent cue rage?
Well, we need to be mindful of our own triggers and try to be patient. Everyone's in this together. And a little understanding can go a long way.
It's like that saying, be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. You never know what someone's going through.
Exactly. And we can also work to design more efficient and equitable queuing systems and promote a culture of respect and consideration, even when we have to wait.
So it's not just about the lines themselves, it's about the social contract we all agree to.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that queuing, like so many other parts of life, is a shared experience.
Yeah.
And we're all in it together.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I have a PhD in queuing now.
You've definitely mastered the subject.
I'm already noticing cues everywhere and analyzing them. It's like I've unlocked a secret code of human behavior.
That's what's great about these deep dives.
Yeah.
They show us how complex everyday life really is.
Before we wrap up this part, I want to give our listeners a challenge. The next time you're in a queue, pay attention to what's going on around you. Notice how people are acting, how the space is designed, and how you're feeling.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
Stay tuned for the third and final part, where we'll talk about the future of queues. It's going to be a fascinating ride.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We have been talking about this really fascinating world of cues, all the psychology and the social dynamics.
And in this final part, we're going to look ahead to the future. How's technology changing the way we wait? And what might cues look like in the years to come?
It's funny, right? We think of keys as these ancient, universal experiences,
Yeah.
but they're also evolving.
Oh, absolutely. The digital age has totally changed how we queue. Think about online ticketing systems, virtual waiting rooms, mobile ordering apps, all that stuff. It lets you skip the line completely. These innovations are changing the whole idea of waiting. It's true. I remember back in the day, if you wanted to go to a concert, you had to actually camp out at the ticket booth, sometimes for hours. And now you can get those tickets online in seconds from your couch.
And it's not just about buying tickets or reserving your spot. Technology is changing the experience of waiting itself. One of the most interesting things is the rise of virtual queues.
Okay, tell me more about these virtual queues. I've heard the term, but I don't really get what they actually are.
So imagine this. Instead of physically standing in line, you join a virtual queue using your phone, and then you get a notification when it's your turn. And in the meantime, you can do whatever. Get a coffee, browse a shop, or just relax at home.
So it's like having a personal waiting assistant. No more wasting time just standing around,
Yeah,
getting all anxious.
exactly. And virtual queues have a lot of benefits for businesses and for customers. They reduce crowding, make the whole experience more pleasant. Customers are happier because they have more control over their time, and businesses can even get data on customer behavior so they can optimize their operations.
It sounds like a win-win. So does this mean the end of the physical line? Is everything going virtual?
That's a good question. Technology is definitely changing things, but I don't think. Physical cues are going away completely. There are some things you just can't replicate virtually.
Like waiting for a roller coaster. You can't get that same feeling from just looking at your phone.
Exactly. The sights and sounds, the energy of the crowd, that feeling of moving closer and closer. Those are all part of the experience. It's like watching a concert on TV versus actually being there in the crowd. Some things just require you to be there.
And even in places like coffee shops, I think there's something about the social aspect of a physical line. You might chat with someone or people watch. It's a break from the digital world.
Yeah, exactly. Those random interactions, you just don't get that in a virtual queue.
So it seems like the future of queuing will be a mix of both, physical and virtual.
I think so. We'll see fancier virtual queuing systems, personalized waiting experiences, and maybe even a comeback for those old school lines that remind us of simpler times.
Maybe we'll have holographic cues or cues that transport us to other dimensions.
The possibilities are endless. But one thing's for sure, people will keep studying cues.
This deep dive has been amazing. I'm seeing cues everywhere now and analyzing them. It's like I've got this new understanding of human behavior.
That's what's so great about these deep dives. They help us see the complexity of everyday things.
We've learned so much about why we wait, how to make it more bearable, and how technology is changing everything.
And we even found some good things about waiting, those moments of reflection, connection, and anticipation. They make life a little richer.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with this. Queuing isn't just about logistics. It shows us who we are, our values, our social norms, how patient or impatient we are, and how we connect with each other, even in ordinary situations.
That's a great way to put it.
So the next time you're in a queue, take a moment to think about it. You might learn something new about yourself and the world around you.
And who knows? You might even enjoy the wait.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of queues